This episode was focused on Betty and Vince. So let's just get Vince out the way. Basically, Vince and his friend, which I believe his name is Pico, they lost one of their friends, and throughout the flashback, we see that Vince basically he had like some treasure. He had this treasure that he wanted to you know, when the board leader was asking him, you know, what's their biggest treasure or whatever, they showed like some piece, some tool or something, but it was never elaborated on what that was and why exactly is that his biggest treasure. So they didn't really show why. And on to Betty. Basically, the main point of this episode is on Betty, and her husband Tuck was in the space trip with Brian, and we know that space trip didn't go as planned. It crashed as it was going to Earth, and basically her husband was in that spaceship, and she basically has a son who she didn't really think that he was gonna try to become an astronaut at first because of what happened to his dad, but then later on, she said 3 years later, he became interested in in space and stuff like that. So her whole thing was, Muta didn't really know what she was all about. Muta thought that she was this tough girl that didn't really like everybody, but she actually has a really, really bad past, and she actually saw the death of her husband live on TV. So that was crazy, and we can see that she, you know, she's kind of, I guess she's kind of scared to go into space, or well, not really, because she said her family didn't really want her to go back because they didn't think she could deal with being on the NASA space ship or whatever. So they didn't think she could deal with going into space because of what happened to her husband. So it was revolved around that. And then now we got Pico, who comes in with a new idea, because every time they land on the moon, the landing thing stays there, and it's gonna just keep piling up. So he created a robot that will link them together and organize it. So hopefully, and Muta's basically gonna be helping Vince. As Vince goes to the moon, Muta's gonna be back in NASA and helping him out at the space station. So that's cool. So, but I thought Muta was gonna go into space, but this episode shows that he's not really ready yet. So they're not really focused on him going into space. They just want him to stay on the base and get a feel for it and help Vince out right now. That's the main mission. But later on, I'm sure they're gonna get him to go into space because he has to build the lunar telescope. If he doesn't build Sharon wants him to build that lunar telescope on the moon, but then we had the hiccup before about the whole they can't really build it because of like weather, whatever, and the sun and all that stuff. So they had to come up with a new plan on how they're gonna get the lunar telescope, how they're gonna build it on the moon. So I think that's really what Muta wants to do right now. He doesn't just want to go to the moon. He wants to go to the moon and build that telescope. We didn't really see Hibito in this episode because he's off training or whatever for the moon. So hopefully he becomes an astronaut and he gets to go back to the moon. But as of right now, Muta, I don't think he's going to be going to the moon anytime soon because they still need to figure out what they're going to do with the lunar telescope, and he's basically going to be Vince's buddy. So that's what he's going to be doing right now. So I don't think he's going to they're going to let him go to the moon because I don't think he'll be ready for it. So it's gonna be Vince and his crew, and they're just gonna be polishing up, going up into space and moving those space landing things around, and hopefully they get back safe. So all Muta really has to do is be his sidekick at home and direct him into space. So that was basically it. But what I think is gonna happen is Muta is gonna go into space, but for another reason besides the lunar telescope. I think something's gonna happen, like when they're working on it now, because now they're working on the that landing thing. Something's gonna happen that only Muta could fix, or somebody else is gonna be able to fix it, but they're gonna send Muta too. So I could see that happening. And in this episode, right, they showed that Brian had information about coming from the moon. Because they showed this like 3 times. every time they show Brian, and you know when they was talking about the last world, Brian always said this information is gonna be very valuable if they find it. So they never really put emphasis on that. So I really want to know, what is this information that Brian is talking about? What is this major information that no one has talked about or discovered yet inside that spaceship? Or have they discovered it but they didn't want to tell anybody? Is there something weird going on the moon? Did they find aliens? Like, what is going on? Because this anime could take a shift, because I don't read the manga, but it could take a complete shift depending on what that information holds. Are they going to be aliens? Because think back, first episode, when we saw the spinning ore in the sky, and they didn't know what it was. So right now it's a slice of life, but it could change. The anime is a slice of life, but it could change. It could get really dark. So I want to know, like, what's the thing that the information that Brian had on the spaceship? Because he had information, but we don't know what it is. So I'm wondering what that information is, and how is it going to tie into Munta going to space and Hibito. And I really want to read the manga, because now I really want to I know the manga is further, so I'm gonna start reading the manga, because I want to know what's about to go down, because the show is getting to a darker place as it moves on. I can see it starting to get, you know, into the whole space thing. People are dying and stuff. So that's really what I want to know. What is the information that Brian had, and is that gonna tie into that spinning ore that we saw in the first episode? Is it gonna tie into that? So when Munta and Hibito go into space. So this show could be really good depending on where the mangaka is gonna take it. Where he's gonna take his show, it all depends on him. But I think those are two questions that we need to be answered. You know, so hopefully they answer those questions coming up episode, because I really want to know what Brian, because this is like the third time they put that in the anime, where he's like, this information is gonna be very valuable to the people and all that stuff. So he found something top secret, or whatever the case may have been, on the moon. So hopefully they explain that, and we get a backstory on what happened with Brian on the moon and Tuck. Hopefully we get a backstory of what happened to them on the moon, and then that will just come into play and right now. So I really want to know what's going on about the whole the information that Brian had. That's probably the key thing from this episode. Every time they show that flashback, Brian always says that key line. So I want to know how does that all tie into Muta and everything. So that's it, guys. And man, hit the like button. Leave your comments down below. What do you guys think is that top secret information? Is the series gonna get darker right now? Is there gonna be some type of aliens or whatever into the series? Leave your comments. Subscribe. I'm Edman. No.